The topic here is about income inequality, a bit like before, but we look at the link with the current account. Yeah. So the current account, we got quite interested in them after the financial crisis, and even before, since 2000, the big external imbalances between countries. And so we would like to know, overall, we would like to explain them, and here we would like to see if there is a link with inequality. So the question is there a relation between both? I will explain why it's not that clear, you know. Can we relate income inequality to current account surplus? And what I will argue is that, so I will argue that with based on our empirical work and also based on the model, that it depends what is the driver for income inequality. So if income inequality comes from a redistribution of labor income, then this is going to lead to current account surpluses. On the other hand, if the income inequality is a redistribution of financial income or an increase in financial income of top earners, then this will lead to current account deficits. Okay? And so, of course, there is not a one-to-one. And of course, if the economy has very developed financial markets, then we're more likely to see financial income redistribution than in countries where financial markets are less developed. So the kind of prototype countries that we have in mind are the UK, where in the UK there was rising inequality and rising current account deficits. Well, if you look at Germany over the last years, there was rising inequality and current account surpluses. So a theory that would just say income inequality is linked to surpluses or deficits would not be enough. We need to be a bit more precise than that. That's what I will try to do. And I will try to make a very simple model and explain it very clearly until it's clear for everyone.
What do you mean by relative labor income? You mean within the country?
Within the country, yes. So it's labor income that is redistributed from bottom earners to the top earners, if you want.
And the financial is the same, think of that as?
And the financial is, so we're going to assume that top earners hold financial wealth, you know, and it's an increase in their financial wealth at the expense of bottom earners. Increase in their financial income at the expense of the bottom earners.
Increase in capital income.
Mm-hmm. So here is the old literature that we referred to. So the papers that are closest to what we do. So we started a while ago, and recently there are quite a few papers that are close. So there's one about Germany that is mostly empirical and try to distinguish what the inequality shock consists of, and whether wealth is actually owned by individual or by firms, whether firms are family firms or not. So that's the Van Zweck et al. There is a paper that we did before, was published in AR, where we had a very simple story, and we were saying, so we have income inequality that goes from the bottom earners. You take it from the bottom earners, you give it to the top earners. It's kind of exogenous shock. And then the top earners, that's going to be the important mechanism, have higher marginal propensity to save. And so they will save. And what would they do? Well, partly they can lend to the bottom earners who are going to become indebted. And if the debt goes up becomes too high, then they will default, and that could be linked to a financial crisis. So that's more or less the story of this paper we did. But of course, it's limited in many dimensions, because if the top earners become richer, they can lend to the poor, but they can also lend abroad, you know, or they can invest in something productive. So today I'm going to explore the possibility that they lend abroad and explain why. So based on what I said before, you take money from the poor, you give it to the rich, they're going to lend abroad. So the natural implication would be that more inequality leads to current account surplus. So I will need to qualify this conclusion. But of course, there is this other possibility So Differa et al. They have a paper where they say it's actually it works in general. It's why capital flows from unequal to from more equal to more unequal countries. So they have one floor. And so in another paper with Ebrami and Rancière, we actually look at the possibility that the top earners invest in productive capacity. Now there are two papers, I think, from your colleagues that are very closely related to what we do, and they consider two different facts. The fact that the bottom earners, they have some preferences, and so after the inequality shock, they're also going to adjust their decision, their savings, that will have some effects. And they kind of hedged their bet by doing another paper where they say that the top earners, when they receive this additional income, they have some kind of propensity to invest, and that's what they're studying. So I'm just going to look at the effect on the current account. So I explained most of that already. And we are going to make a cross-country analysis to make this link between income inequality and current account deficit. Okay. So the empirical approach is actually we're taking this EBA methodology from IMF. So it's an external balance assessment. It's kind of the official way the IMF looked at the current account determinants. And they have a quite long list of explanatory variables that can explain current account. So to give you an idea of what's in this list, so we have all the traditional productivity, GDP growth, a lot of stuff, financial countries, non-financial countries. Yeah, so there's a lot in it. And so we essentially take the regression, and we will try to add income, an inequality shock to this regression, and see whether we have an effect on current account. So overall, it's a panel. That we have from 1986 to 2016, and that we are also trying to update, but it's a lot of work. And for top income shares, we use the most used source of data for that, so the World Income and Wealth database, World Inequality database. Sorry. Okay, now the naive approach is we take just income inequality for the World Income database, and we add to the regression. So without doing the regression, I can show you a very basic scatter plot. If I take the top 5% income share for the World Income database, I take the current account, or the change in current account over GDP, more precisely. So that change in top 5%, change in current account. Then it kind of looks like I have more like a negative slope. So more inequality, deficit, But then, I mean, it's not super convincing. You have countries all around. I will show later that this regression is actually not significant, and so there is more to it. So we have this idea that we're going to we want to distinguish a bit the two kinds of shocks that I told about before, like some kind of financial inequality shock and some kind of income inequality shock. And so we cannot see that in the data very clearly. I'm going to explain how we cope with this situation. But the one first order approach would be to separate countries that have high, big financial centers and those who have small financial sectors. So basically, we just look at financial markets, sorry. So we just try to separate these two, and we just proxy that by the size of the stock market. So we take all the countries, we measure the stock market, and we take the 50% and the half the country that have the smallest stock market. So let's look at again at the relation between rising inequality and current account, but separate the countries that have high big stock markets, so more financial countries, and the other ones. So now it looks like we have a negative relationship for high stock market countries and positive relationship. So the one on the right is consistent with the story I told you at the bottom. You have more inequality, the rich save more, current account surplus.
So migration again here
it's a regression, change in current account over change of top 5% income share. But it's over GDP, it's current account over GDP. Yeah, maybe that's what you were asking before. It's over GDP. And these two regressions are a bit more robust, but still it's just exploratory work. So now what we would like to do is to actually understand what happens differently in the countries with the higher stock market and in the other countries with lower or less developed financial markets. And so here is the first kind of sizable contribution that we have is find methodology to actually separate the two shocks in the regression. But for instance, I mean, if you compare with a paper by Straub et al., we have the effect that when the top earners have their income that goes up, they will want to lend more, and it will lower interest rate. So interest rate, when the country saves, interest rate will be lower in equilibrium, which is consistent with the model where you have a more explicit financial sector, but we're not being more precise than that. So let's see how we can separate the two kinds of shocks. So this equation I'm showing here, they are just accounting. There is no approximation really here. So the income of the top earners, come from the financial income and the labor income. Now, in the economy, we know what is the total financial income. We know what is the total labor income. So the top earners, they get a fraction of financial income, a big fraction. I will argue that beta is not far from 1. And they also get a fraction of the labor income. Okay, so they get omega of labor income, beta of financial income. Now, what we have in the Piketty's database is the top income share. So it's this divided by GDP. And when I do the division, then you have now the financial income share and the total labor income share. And now the two shares sum to 1, so I can rewrite everything as a function of financial income share here. So the idea is that my two shocks are going to be the beta and the omega, And so I will argue that when there is a omega shock, that's a labor income redistribution. It's going to lead to a current account surplus. When I have a beta shock, it's going to be the opposite. And then I will need to do the theory to explain what is the difference between these two. But then there is an empirical challenge here, is that basically this we measure, but the rest is very complicated. It's very complicated because if you take, for instance, the declared income in the World Income Database, so you have wages, pension, you have this mixed income, which corresponds to the firms that you own, but it's not also the same for all the countries, it's very heterogeneous. You have your rental income, you have the dividends that you receive from the firms that you own, and interest that are paid on your saving. And we want something that is cross-country. So, yeah. So we cannot do a from the World Income Database, we cannot exactly decompose essentially labor income and financial income because it's too complicated, too heterogeneous between countries, and so that's not, and we don't have that for the whole time periods, So we don't do that. So instead we say, so the one statistic that we measure is the share, the labor income, And so we do this decomposition. we say, so the top income share, we actually, so this is the equation I had before, you know. And we're going to try to make a little, we're going to try to estimate the beta and the omega, but we add some restrictions. So essentially our strategy is that we're going to try to get a relatively close estimate of the omega, so the labor income shock, and try to clean it for changes in financial income. So what we are trying to estimate is a version of omega that will hold water in the regressions, you know. Now we make this assumption, kind of restrictive assumption, that the share that the top earners get from the financial income share, this share beta, we assume it's constant over.
But why do you take the top?
So what we do is we divide the labor share we observe. So we divide everything by the labor share, and we're going to get top 5% income divided by labor share. And here, the financial, so the top 5% we take from the world income database, and the financial share we have from the national accounts. So essentially, we have everything. So, and the labor share is 1 minus the financial share. So in this equation here, if we want to estimate the omega I, we have top 5%. Yeah, I'm repeating myself, sorry, but we have top 5% from Piketty and labor share from national accounts. And we choose some form from omega I with time fixed effects and country fixed effects, okay, and random epsilon. So that's the first stage of our regression to identify some kind of pure labor income cleaned of financial income redistribution. Now, the result of this first stage regression is here. Yeah, so this is the first term. It is very significant, and basically we get the, and so you also observe that the beta equals 1 is not really satisfied in the data. And we're going to keep the residual, the omega IT, for the next regression. Now, the next regression, now we take current account of a GDP, you know, and on the first line you have two versions of the naive regression I was showing before. So if you just say I'm going to regress current account of a top 5% income share, you have something that is negative if you want it to be negative because you take all the regressors from the EBA. If you change a bit the number of regressors, you change the sign, and in both cases it's not really robust. So this first approach was too naive. On the other hand, if I do the EBA regression and I add the what I call the labor inequality shock, you know, the top 5% share of the labor, the omega, then that one is actually significant and it is positive. So positive is what you expect based on the simple reasoning I made at the beginning. Yeah. And so then you might ask, okay, but then I treat it a bit differently in a way that's not symmetric, my labor income shock and financial income shock. So unfortunately, we haven't found a good way really of estimating both the beta and the omega in a very symmetric way. It's ongoing work. What we can do is we can actually take this regression and add now the financial top 5% financial, so the financial share of total income, you know, and you know that one goes mostly to the top earners. If we add that one to the same regression, it does come, it is significant with a negative sign, which is consistent with what I said before, but again, it's not exactly the same. It's not a shock that is exactly symmetric to this one. So now I'm going to, but so if you believe this empirical part, then the problem is that we need a model that, I'd like a model that explains both versions of the story, you know? And I'd like the model to be as close as possible to the former paper. I don't want to add too much here. So I'm going to explain, I'm going to show you a model that does it. stylized model. It's kind of low tech, you will see. So there are two household groups. There are the top earners and the bottom earners. Top earners are like this top 5%. And we're going to assume that the shock is a persistent shock, permanent shock that distributes some income from the bottom to the top earners. But then this shock will have a specific structure, and we can have a shock that is a shock to labor income or to the dividend income. We will calibrate the model so that top earners have higher marginal propensity to save than bottom earners. Both of them have non-zero marginal propensity to save. So just for those who are not super into this literature, if you take the standard macro model, when you have a permanent income shock, there's no saving that follows from that, you know. So, but this is very counterfactual, because if you look at the data, you find that rich individuals save much more, and you also find you have micro evidences that marginal propensity to save is not zero. Now we have two countries. Now the fact that we have two countries is not very important here. All the intuitions, they would be exactly the same if you had one small open economy, taking world interest rate as given. The advantage of formulating the model with two countries is that you can look at the effect on the world interest rate, but that's pretty much it. So in each country, especially the domestic country, you have bottom earners, top earners, and the population share of top earners is 5%. There's one good in the world, and now we have the exogenous shock, which is, we take it as an endowment income in the economy. And here, I think it's easier if I show you on the board. So let's assume that the economy produces 1. That's the total production. Then there's a fraction here that goes to the financial sector. This fraction is YT. And the fraction that goes to the workers, to labor income, and that fraction is 1 minus YT. So this is going to be tradable income because there's a value associated to it. It's a dividend, you know, and this is labor income. Now, all the financial income is held by top earners, but the labor income is split between bottom earners, who receive a fraction zeta t of it, zeta t 1 minus yt. 1 minus zeta, sorry. Yes. So there's a fraction. So it's a fraction. I've seen that before. Okay, this one is good enough. There's a fraction 1 minus zeta t that goes to the bottom earners, a fraction of this labor income, and a fraction zeta t that goes to the top earners. Okay? Now, if you look at the total income received by the top earners, it is made of dividend income plus labor income. The bottom earners, they receive just labor income. And so it's very close, basically, to the counting equations I had before, if you assume that beta is equal to 1, with a change in notations too. Now, in this model, we have two financial instruments. One of them is debt that is traded by all agents. And so for the sake of simplicity, we assume it's a console that gives you it gives you a coupon of 1 if you hold it. And it's traded at price PT. Okay, now domestically, the bottom earners have B underscript B, and the top earners have B underscript tau. And the same in the other country for domestic and top earners. As for the trade, as for the other financial instrument, it's actually a share of this tradable income, you know. So the share is traded only among top earners at a price that is QT, and the dividend is basically the production, so it's basically YT. I take AT equal to 1. Okay, and it's in fixed supply, and the reason we have this share is because we want to compute the value of this financial income. And that's going to be the part of the financial wealth of the top earners. Now, the only ingredient we need for the model to work, so here I've shown you all the accounting assumptions, you know. Most of the actual restrictions are in the last 2 slides. And then we specify preferences for the agents. So we use this specification with preference for wealth, where each agent values consumption with CRA function, and also values its wealth. That's the instantaneous utility, and each agent tries to maximize the discounted stream of instantaneous utility. Now, this is slightly non-standard, but I will explain a little bit how it works. But the role of this equation is only to generate non-zero marginal propensity to save. If you change this device with any other device that generates the same, the rest of the model is perfectly consistent, and again, just basically accounting. So if you take this utility function, just to explain what it does, and you look at the Euler equation at the steady state, what you get is something like this. So you have 1, the beta times change in consumption, but that's 0, times U prime C divided by U prime W, sorry, divided by U prime C. And so this is the Euler equation at the steady state. And that one tells you that at the steady state, our agents, to be happy, need consumption and wealth to be commensurate. So the iso-utility curves are something like this. So if you have one agent and his consumption increases, then he also wants to be richer. Okay? And essentially, so that's the source of the effect that we had before. So if you have the income inequality shock, the income of the top earners goes up, meaning that they're going to consume a bit more. And because they consume a bit more, they will also want more wealth in equilibrium, meaning that they will save to reach this equilibrium. Okay. But what we say is now you can revert it if you have the wealth shock. The agent is going to be too rich for its consumption, so it will want to actually decrease wealth a little bit so that its wealth gets commensurate with its consumption, and the way it does is by borrowing. So I can go back to that if you have questions, but just to finish the model, now we have but there's no surprise here. So we have the consumption of the bottom earners. Bottom earners, they have their share of labor income. That's what you have here. Now it's per capita, so we divide by the population. And it can accumulate debt, at the price P. The top earners, it is the same. They have their share of the labor income, can accumulate debt, and also has these stocks that are traded among top earners. So it's going to, there will be no change here, basically. Now, the key variable, and the main difference with the paper we did before, is that now what is the wealth of these agents that goes in my preference for wealth? Well, for top earners, it's very easy. You have the value of the shares. So it's basically the value of the tradable income. And the value of the debt, the consoles that they have accumulated. That's very clear. Now, for the bottom earners, their wealth is also the debt that they have. Now, we have a little technical problem because, I mean, the savings might be negative, and we don't want the wealth parameter here to be negative. So we have actually a fixed coefficient here that Stone-Geary, it yields Stone-Geary preferences. And so we need this fix for the bottom earners. So now to close the model, we have the world interest rate in 2 countries. We have the world good markets. There's no surprise. The share markets also is, I already commented on that. And bonds are in zero net supply worldwide. And we have this variable to measure net foreign asset and current account. So you can see that all the equations are actually linear in all the endogenous variables because this is exogenous. So it's essentially, I'm showing you a model that is proportional. So the reaction is really proportional to the shocks once you have calibrated the response of the agents to match the data. The top earners has some labor income and some tradable income. So the tradable income, so I'm going to put income here. So income, sorry, and wealth. So he also has on top of the labor income, he has dividend income. And the dividend income also increases his wealth in a way that is proportional given the interest rate. No?
You cannot trade that internationally.
No. And on top of that, he can choose to accumulate bonds to match his desired level of wealth for his income somehow. Huh? He sells them or shorts them depending on the calibration. Now, this is abstracting from the effect of interest rate because the interest rate links your wealth to your income through the dividend payments, but that's relatively small and you can neglect that when you think of the model. Now, what happens if income goes up? If my income goes up, that income is not very far from consumption, you know. It's almost equal to consumption modulo the interest rate payments that are relatively small. So if my income goes up, I'm going to accumulate wealth, I'm going to accumulate bonds. And that's exactly what happens if I have a shock to labor income. And that's what I have in the next slide, okay? And then I will look at the other kind of shock. Let me do the calibration. So the calibration is, for the sake of clarity, we have all the shock perfectly persistent. It's not really, it's not that we cannot do otherwise, it's just that we need a baseline. And then we look at 2 economies. One of them has a relatively high share of the stock market at 20% of GDP, and the other one is 10%.
What is the alpha? I forgot.
The alpha, where is the alpha?
You have the rho alpha.
So this is an autocorrelation of output. I excluded it from my explanations. This is autocorrelation of the dividend distribution shock, and this is the autocorrelation of the labor income inequality shock. Yeah.
So permanent shocks.
Yeah, they're all permanent. And the income share of the top earners is 25%. So we calibrated this story model basically on the US. World interest rate, 4%. Elasticity of substitution, 2%. And then the question is this exotic parameters of the utility function. So there was the phi here, the eta here. So we have no idea what they are in the data. So we basically choose them to calibrate marginal propensity to save, and we target 50%, which is not too far from what you have in the US, 45%. You had like 56%, I think, in your slide, or no, 46% in your slide before.
So
Now the labor income shock. So the effect of the labor income shock, I'm going to increase labor income of the top earners by 10%. So this is top earners. So I increase the labor income and I decrease the labor income of bottom earners. Yeah, it's very small, no? But dividend the share of tradable income stays the same, doesn't move. Now, the result of it is that my top earners feel richer, so they actually, I mean, they have higher income, so they want to save. And you see that the total saving of the economy actually goes up. Do I have the bottom earners? Yeah, it goes up. Actually, the country is accumulating foreign assets, is running a current account surplus, is having an effect on the world interest rate because the country wants to save, so the world interest rate goes down, having a small negative effect on the world interest rate. So these are the direct effects. What is less direct is that because the interest rate goes down, the value of the tradable income and even the value of the bonds actually goes up. This is what you see here. The value of the financial assets actually go up. And because the value of the financial assets go up, it will decrease a little bit the will to accumulate assets from the top earners. So it interacts, non-trivial, but that doesn't change the intuition. The intuition being that the top earners want to save and that you have a current account surplus. Okay, so this is current account surplus arising from a distribution of. Now the second kind of shock, to close the presentation, is what happens now if I have increase in my dividend share of the top earners. Now it's going to affect both sides at the same time. It's going to, if the top earners receive more dividends, it's going to increase their income, but at the same time it's going to increase their wealth. If the effect on the wealth dominates, they will have too high wealth, with respect to the income that they want, because that one does not rise as fast. And the way that they can keep wealth proportionate to income slash consumption is by reducing their total wealth and actually borrowing some. So this is actually mechanical. It's implied by just, if you have a formula for marginal propensity to save, it is implied by this formula. Now, it sounds a bit strange at the first time. The most concrete example you can think of is like you have the value of your house, the value goes up, you refinance, and you borrow based on the value of your house. So it's not a behavior that's completely absent. Now, if we look at the effect of this shock on the dividend distribution shock, so I didn't say before we had 0.4% current account surplus, and now if I do a 10% dividend shock, so the share of the economy up, that goes to finance, goes up by 10% of GDP. And of course, it reduces the labor income of top earners a little bit, mechanically. It reduces the labor income of the bottom earners much more. So what we have is that the top earners, as I said, in average will want to actually borrow, so they will and this will lead to a current account deficit. The country is going to borrow from the rest of the world. You're going to have a reduction in net foreign assets. For the same reason as before, but just the opposite direction, you have a rise in the world interest rate, tends to push it up a little bit, but that's just for the sake of to understand that it's consistent. Now, if you look at the value of the stock, that one goes up because there are just more dividends, So this tends to move the value of the value of the stocks up. Of course, it is partly, you have more dividends, so value of the stocks goes up. It is partly compensated by the rise in the interest rate, which decreases a little bit the valuation of these higher dividends, But the net result is what you have here. So there is an increase in the value of financial assets.
We're missing. Why do they want to borrow this?
The top earners?
Yeah.
So what they have is that
The dividend income goes up, yeah.
So the dividend income goes up, their wealth goes up because it corresponds to dividends, but it goes up by more, if you want, for the preference than the labor income. No, it goes up more than their income.
And so
It's
they
a
want to.
valuation effect or something.
Yes. It increases the value of their wealth, and then they want to consume more, And And the way they consume more when the value of their wealth goes up is by borrowing. If you want, it's like
Because
the.
they don't,
It's almost like.
they don't consume because they don't want to consume out of their wealth, precisely because utility.
Yeah, I mean, imagine that this dividend is like what you would call the illiquid asset. You know, so you have the value of the liquid asset goes up. You want to consume more because your consumption and your wealth need to be proportionate. And so what you do is you trade the bond to consume more.
Trade these claims to the dividend income.
Yeah.
Because they cannot trade them because.
I mean, they don't trade that to the bottom earners. You know,
Yeah, the
they
bottom
trade it
earners,
among themselves, but not to the bottom
because
earners.
the bottom earners, you assume that they
Yes.
don't hold stocks. In the rest of the world,
And the rest of the world here, we don't allow for stock trading between this, because I mean, international portfolio models becomes
yeah, okay, no, okay,
another
now
class
I'm
of one.
understanding the mechanics.
Yes.
China is the rest of the world.
But the implications are even more complicated. So, okay. So the conclusion is, so we have this model where we can explain both reaction to an inequality shock. This model is essentially any model that generates non-zero marginal propensity to save and significant marginal propensity to save of the top earners with if you have if you take the right valuation of wealth in this model. Okay, so we have the empirical part. That's what I was saying before, and I will skip the rest of the conclusion. So, is there another question I can answer before we go for lunch? No?
Thank
Yeah.
you very much, Pablo.
Welcome.